Cool, thanks.
Mhm.
All right. So I guess we're gonna get started. Uh, so yeah, today, if you haven't heard, we're going to talk about Braille music, the code for notating musical information in Braille. So um, the the biggest difference right off the bat, I would say, when comparing it to print sheet music is that it is there's a bigger gap between how it's expressed in Braille versus print than there is in the literary world. So in literary Braille, as you all probably know, um, you have, it's a one-to-one encoding. Contractions may complicate that a little bit, but basically it's a one-to-one encoding of every letter in print, has a letter in Braille. In When you're notating music, that gets more complicated because if you know anything about how print sheet music is written, it's kind of pictorial. It's kind of like a picture. It's like a graph, essentially, where as the shape of as the the melody and whatnot goes up and down, the position of the notes on the page go physically up and down. It's like a graph, representing the shape of it, the contour of what's written there. So that's not going to work in Braille because obviously of how the linear nature of how Braille is produced, how it's written and read. So to get around that, what we have instead in Braille are seven note symbols, one for the notes A through G, uh, and then there are octave signs that tell you what octave the note is in. So there's none of this messing around with staffs and putting the notes between or on the lines or clefs that tell you where on the uh, where in the sort of grand scale all these notes are placed. It's a very linear uh, system, and so that has its benefits and drawbacks. But one benefit is that it tends to be a lot more efficient when you look at taking up space on the page. It's a lot more efficient compared to print music than literary Braille is compared to literary print. That is, there's more of a one-to-one correlation in terms of how many pages you're going to require. But yeah, so I'll get into other aspect, the more of the philosophy of it later. But um, for now, I think I'll just introduce a few basic things about the notation, and then later you can read this little example that I have prepared. But it's on this paper here. So yeah, the code was, as you can probably guess, invented by Louis Braille, who was French, and in France and I think all of continental Europe, they use the solfège system for naming notes. That's do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do, as instead of using letters. So because of that, I assume because of that, Louis Braille started the note symbols with the literary letter D for do, and went up through just the ensuing letters of the Braille alphabet. So it ended up being there's seven, so D through J, um, that represent what he would have called the notes do through T. But the unfortunate coincidence there is that in English, since we use letters for the note names, um, that means that the Braille note symbols are one letter off from what they would be in literary Braille. In other words, the note C looks like D, the note D looks like E, and so on. So it does take a little getting used to, but I don't want to overwhelm all you got, because a lot of you are, learning literary Braille. So to avoid, confusing it too much, I'll just leave it at that. Basically, you have the letters, the equivalent of the letters D through J represent the notes C through B. You start in the note C and go up through B. And then there's the whole question of the note length, right? Or the note value, as it's called. So for that, you add lower dots to the cell because the seven symbols are just in the top two rows of the cell, right? So six dot cell has three rows. So you add dots on the bottom to indicate the note value, note length. So um, you if there are no lower dots, that's an eighth note. Um, if you add dot six, that's a quarter note. If you add dot three, that's a half note. And then if you add dots three and six, that is either a whole note or a 16th note. The way you can tell the difference between those is how many there are in a measure. Because if there's only one, and spaces indicate divisions of measures. So if there's one note and it has dots 3 and 6 and surrounded by spaces, chances are that's a whole note, except in very rare cases. But whereas if there are multiple of them in a measure, those are probably 16th notes. Um, so that is those are the basics. There are symbols for rests. There are symbols for all sorts of other things, key signature, time signature, everything you could want to notate. But again, in the interest of simplicity, in the interest of not overwhelming, I'm going to leave it at that in terms of describing the technical symbols. So then as then there's the question of like how are you gonna use this? Like how does this work practically? So obviously, you can't sight read as a sighted musician could, that is, play and read at the same time, because you have to use your hands to read. So usually the way this is solved is that you memorize a little bit at a time. You memorize a few measures, then a few more, then a few more, and so on. So you have the whole piece memorized, the whole song, whatever chunk of music you're memorizing. Um, that means that you don't that if you're doing it, as a blind person, you don't have this intermediate step that sighted people talk about where they can play it, but they need the music in front of them. Uh, Basically, if you're blind, if you're relying on this system, if you can play the piece, then you have it memorized because there's not really that intermediate step. Because again, how would you do that? You have to use your hands to read. So that can mean that it can take longer in some cases, and that's why it's in practical cases where you're learning, um, you have to get a certain amount of music learned at a certain time. I will just say it never hurts to be able to learn some things by ear. Uh, you may have to rely on that sometimes, given practicalities, given that I'm sure we're all familiar with, agencies and whatnot can drag their feet on getting you the materials in time and all of that rigmarole that we know and let's say love. Um, so I think that's sort of my thoughts on it. Incidentally, if you're interested in learning more, there's a very aptly named textbook that's just called How to Read Braille Music. It's published by the National Braille Press. I just looked it up today. It's in stock, so if you want, you can order that from nbp.org, maybe other places too, but I trust the National Braille Press. Um, they've been good to me, as it were. So uh, that is yeah, How to Read Braille Music from the National Braille Press. Will get you started. Um, so at this point, I think I'd like to move into the other that mysterious word that you may have been hearing a lot lately, and that is MuseScore. That's capital MUSE, capital SCORE, one word. And that is a piece of software for producing sheet music. So that's kind of the the reverse of what I've just been talking about for the last few minutes. I've been talking about how you can get the information, how you can receive the information as a blind person. Now with MuseScore, you can send the information to your sighted peers. Um, but first, I'm going to talk a little bit about the history of these programs. So the for a long time, if you're a blind person wanting to produce any kind of sheet music, there was only one game in town. It was called Lime Aloud, and it was based on a fairly obscure Windows program called Lime, and it was modified by mostly by a guy named Bill McCann, but he had a company, or still does have a company called Dancing Dots, and they sort of modified this program Lime to make it work with JAWS, the JAWS screen reader. And so you'd Lime Aloud in conjunction with some JAWS scripts, and together they would allow you to do what you needed to do generally. But there were some hurdles there. For one thing, it only worked with JAWS. It did not work with NVDA. Narrator, yeah, good luck with that. So that was one thing. You had to have JAWS, which means that somebody had to pay for that. Also, somebody had to pay for Lime Aloud, which cost money on its own. And I don't blame Dancing Dots for needing to make money, but that is an additional hurdle that that you wouldn't have to deal with if you're sighted. So again, the process that we're all familiar with to varying degrees, how do you get your school or your VR agency or whatever it may be to pay for it? How do you convince them? Then what do you do in the time that you're waiting for them to get it? On and on. So that's why it was really exciting to me and a lot of us in this field when MuseScore came on the scene in the 2010s. So for a long time, you'll remember that I said the program that Limeloud was based on was very obscure. The big ones, the big mainstream programs, music notation programs uh, that were in common use, there were two, maybe three, depending on how you count them. One was called Sibelius, one was called Finale, and another was called Dorico. They were the kind of three behemoths, the CBS, ABC, and NBC of the sheet music software world. And as as often happens, they grew and grew and grew over the years. They got more bloated, more unwieldy, more opaque, harder to learn for new users. New features were added in ill-advised places, and the code got more complicated to modify. And so it became more and more sort of unattractive for developers and users alike by the early 2010s, and that's when MuseScore started to take over more of the market and more of people's interest. The cool thing about MuseScore is that it is what we call open source, which means that it is developed mostly by user contributions. Most of the developers are just users who volunteer their time. There's a small paid staff, sustained mostly by government grants and probably private donations. I don't know. There's a small paid staff that just, manages everything, makes sure that the uh, keeps track of all the changes of the development, authorizes everything, stuff that you got to do. You got to have a little bit of centralization. But in general, the contributions are made by the users, and that means that for most of us, unless you're again, unless you're one of the people giving grants and stuff, it is free. MuseScore is completely free to download, and that also means because of the open source nature of it, it can be modified more easily to work with screen readers, and that is what they started to do. That's what the people at MuseScore, in particular, a guy named Mark Sabatella, that you're going to hear from in a minute, started doing in the mid 2010s. So yeah, I think now is a good time to sort of introduce that part. So I actually interviewed Mark Sabatella on Monday, and I got a recording of our conversation that I'm going to play for you. Um, I'm going to just explain a few things that he referenced to make sure we're all on the same page. So he talks about employing some students from a program called the Google Summer of Code. So this is a program run by Google where, as he describes them, effectively interns can work on projects supervised by people that need code for their software that they're developing. So he got in touch with a few of them, but he's also a professor. He's also a music professor. Mark is, and he had some students in his. He had two mainly. One in 2013 and another a few years later that took classes from him that were blind, and that's what spurred him to get interested in this because he also has a background in software. He talks about that in the interview. So it's a real story of collaboration and determination and also just having a wide array of prior knowledge in different backgrounds. So he will sometimes reference students, meaning the people that worked at the Google Summer of Code, and sometimes he'll be talking about his students at university. If he's talking about music students, he means his students at the university. Otherwise, he's talking about developers that helped bring this whole accessibility thing to fruition. So, okay, I mentioned Sibelius already. It's an old still existing, but kind of on its way out, music notation software. Um, yeah, he talks about bar lines and clefs and dynamics as something that needed to be made accessible. Those are pieces of music notation. Bar lines separate bars or measures. Clefs tell you, again, this is a print thing, not a Braille thing. Clefs tell you what range you're in, basically. Um, and dynamics are, have indications of how loud or soft you're playing. He also talks about getting it to work with VoiceOver on Mac, which is another thing I hadn't even talked about. That again, but it speaks to the nature of the open source, the benefits of open source is that it makes it a lot easier to make these sort of modifications, and something that would have been a pipe dream with Sibelius or Finale is a reality with MuseScore because more people have more access to more code essentially. So that is what he was able to get it working on Mac. The Mac operating system is somewhat notorious for being harder to make stuff work with its screen reader than Windows. So it's a real kudos to him, I think, having the uh, for having the interest in getting it to work. And also, the same goes for Narrator on Windows. Everything I said about open source and getting things to work with screen readers and that being easier when you have more people is also why he was able to get it to work with Narrator on Windows, the built-in screen reader. So you have a lot of options because it can work with JAWS or NVDA or Narrator or VoiceOver on Mac. And let's see, there's one other thing I want to get through in these notes here. Oh yeah. Yeah, and in fact, there's one more example of that was the most surprising to me, which is an operating system called Linux, which I'm not going to get into right now because that's a whole other ball of wax. But Linux is a whole operating system that's open source, and it has a screen reader called Orca, and he even got it to work with Orca on Linux. And without going on a tangent, I'll just say that's pretty unusual, and I think it's pretty cool that he was able to get all that to work because a lot of developers would not care about their product working on Linux at all, much less whether it worked with the Linux screen reader, much less even be aware that there is such a thing. So then, yeah, he also mentions a thing called Music XML. That is a way of encoding musical information in software so you can transfer it between different programs and display it on different devices. Um, then, yeah, Sao Mai is a group in Vietnam that produces some Braille software and they made a contribution to MuseScore. And then, yeah, there's a email list called MENVI, which stands for Music Educators Network for the Visually Impaired. That's where I got a hold of Mark, actually. I got in touch with him through his contributions to that mailing list because he sent a lot of emails to it and talked about all the new developments with MuseScore. So yeah, and one other word he uses is architecture, which I think I used it too. It just refers to the structures of a piece of software. What kind of pieces of code does it use? Where does it pull from? How are things structured? So that's the architecture of the program. So yeah, let's see. I need to share my audio here. And stop my video. Alt video settings. Press control. More options for stop my video. Currently on mute. Press control. Gallery video. Mute. Stop my video. Mute. Menu. Stop my video. Mute. Currently unmuted. Mute. Gallery video. View menu button. Meeting sign in button. Leave. More meeting. Press control plus share. Select a window or in. Layouts and options. Optimize. Shares. Tab control. Select share sound. Content only. Share sound. Check. Optimize. Share screen button. Screen sharing meeting controls window. There we go. You have started screen share. Press F6 to switch. Post at handy. Untitled score called screen sharing meeting controls column 1. Screen sharing meeting. Got the audio. File participants can now see your screen alert. File explorer. Preview. Quick act. Search box edit. Preview. Level 1. Level 0. Quick act. Left BC. Items view list. Frequent folder. Download 2 of 20. Preview. This BC. Level 2 3D. Desktop collab document. Download. Mute picture. Videos. Bootcat. Level 1 network collab. Let's see. My flash drive is not being recognized. Just bear with me. There we go. That's the happy sound. All right. Items view list. Preview. Network. LF120. Items. My recordings April 4th. Mark Sabatella. Okay, here we go. Sorry about that. Here is my conversation with Mark Sabatella of MuseScore. So I guess to start with, how did you get started with as a developer on MuseScore?
So my path to getting involved with development is specifically because of accessibility,
Mm-hmm.
where I was teaching a jazz theory course at a university,
Mm-hmm.
and I had a student in the class who was blind, and it was the first time this university had ever had a blind student
Right.
before. And we're like, scrambling around trying to figure out, well, how are we going to do this? And, how is she going to take
Mm-hmm.
tests and how are we going
Mm-hmm.
to do things? And, we figured stuff out as we went along. But in the course of that, we were like, man, it would sure be nice if there was some accessible music notation software out there. And at the time, this was like 2010 probably,
Mm-hmm.
um, Sibelius had previously been accessible. They had some scripts, Sibelius Speaking, I think it was called.
Yeah, that
But
sounds right.
those scripts were like defunct. They would like no
Mm-hmm.
longer work with any current version of Sibelius. And so we just had to like couple other things together.
Mm-hmm.
But one of my students told me, well, you should check out MuseScore. It's open
Nice.
source, and they knew
Mm-hmm.
I was a programmer. And so we checked it out, and it was just before the release of 1.0. It wasn't accessible in any reasonable way then, but I'm like, okay, well, I could probably do something with this. And so I
Mm-hmm.
started using it myself, started getting my feet wet, doing other development on it. But, at some point after I was kind of in there and knew the code and had been involved for a couple of years, I started working on accessibility
Right,
stuff.
right.
And
Yeah.
then also I mentored a student. Google runs a program called the Google Summer of Code,
Ah,
in
yes,
which
I've
they
heard of it.
basically pay college students, like interns, basically for the
Mm-hmm.
summer to work on open source software. And so I mentored two different students who did accessibility work on
Mm-hmm.
MuseScore. So I basically spec'd out what needed to happen,
I see.
and they actually did the work. And then
Okay,
I did work on my own too.
cool. And what year was that then? Early 2010s, I would assume?
Yeah, I think the first student who did the accessibility work must have been because his work became part of MuseScore 2.0,
Mm-hmm.
which released in 2015. So his
Okay,
work was probably the summer of
I
2013,
see. Yeah.
maybe 2014, not sure,
Okay,
somewhere around there.
cool. So that was the bulk of the sort of the prototypes of what became the accessible versions of MuseScore.
Yeah,
Um,
and so his work specifically was getting the screen reader to read as you navigated. Well, actually, more than that, we needed navigation functions at all because,
mm-hmm.
so much of MuseScore was based on click this, click that,
Right, right.
and we needed there to be ways of navigating. I mean, you could use the cursor to move note by note through the score, but it would skip bar lines and
Mm-hmm.
clefs and lots of dynamics and lots
Right,
of other things
right.
you would need it to do. So he wrote code to at least partially do that, and
Mm-hmm.
then also read everything,
Mm-hmm.
hooked up the screen reader basically.
Right.
And then the other student that I had a couple years later, she improved that code for the navigation so that you literally can navigate virtually everything in the score.
This was
And
the.
she also started setting up the palettes to be navigatable so
Mm-hmm.
that you could add elements. Because even then, it was after the first guy's work, Andre, you could navigate and listen to a score, hear the screen reader
Mm-hmm.
read the notes, but you couldn't reasonably do a lot of editing because too much of the rest of the interface wasn't screen reader friendly. And
Right.
so the second student's work laid the groundwork for that, and then I added more work and other people added more work so that by the time, I don't know, I think 2017 or so,
Mm-hmm.
2018, MuseScore 3 point something came out and we were
Mm-hmm.
able to fully support screen reader editing and navigation because that came about because I had another blind student at another university.
Mm-hmm.
And same story, we needed to get things accessible for her. And I'm like, dang it, we're going to make this thing work so that she
Yeah.
can write music and not just read
Yeah.
it. And we
Sure.
got it. We got it
So
by the end of her year. These were Google Summer of Code
I see.
students.
I
So
see. I see.
they
Yeah.
were like, I never met them. One of them was in Romania. The other
I
one
see.
was in India.
I see. This was all
So yeah,
remote. Yeah. Okay.
no, but it was students of
It was done
mine at
remotely. Yeah.
universities who kind of
Who
inspired the need
spurred
for
that
this.
whole thing? Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Sure.
and then became beta testers.
Yeah.
Well, at least
Yeah.
the second one was a important beta
Yeah.
tester for all of this.
Yeah. That's great. So then your background then is mostly in music, but you do a bit of software development as well. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, my undergraduate degree was math and computer science,
Oh, okay.
and I worked for Hewlett Packard doing software for a number of years, and then quit that to just do music full time. Went
Cool.
back, got a music degree, so I could teach, and
Cool.
so
Yeah.
since then I've primarily been doing music, but the software
Yeah.
background allowed me to
Sure.
step into MuseScore and know what I was
Yeah.
doing.
Yeah. A real hybrid of the two. That's cool.
Yeah.
Bit of parallel to my own life, I guess. I've
Oh,
had sort of
cool.
an interest in both. Academically, mostly music was my focus, but I have had something of an interest since childhood in coding and
Nice.
software, and it's
Yeah,
good
for
to have that
sure.
in the arsenal.
I will
But
say, just as a little advice, that one thing about software is that the world changes so
yeah,
fast.
yeah, absolutely.
My skills, the skills I learned in university are fairly useless
Yeah,
now,
yeah,
whereas the music I learned in university is not.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. Um, yeah, it speaks to the value of other other avenues of learning that stuff, other sources of that information, whether it's online academies or
Sure.
similar things.
And the meta skills, I mean, the
Yeah,
skills of programming
understanding what
they
for
carry
loops are.
forward
Yeah,
even if the particular programming languages and the
yeah,
particular libraries and APIs are
right.
long dead.
No, that's great. So then, how much in touch with the rest of the MuseScore team and company and stuff were you? Like, what was the process of integrating this accessibility features into the rest of MuseScore, and did it require any persuasion of the rest of the team, or how did that go?
That's a good question. This came in a couple different waves. So during that first wave, when I was mentoring that one student to do
Mm-hmm.
screen reader support,
Mm-hmm.
there was only two main developers of MuseScore at the time. The team was three people, and one person wasn't a programmer. He was more
Mm-hmm.
marketing and
Mm-hmm.
website stuff. So there was really only two developers, and one of them was the guy who originated the program, and he kind of just lived in his own world. So there
Mm-hmm.
was really only one person that I really had to interact with at any significant level, and he was
Yeah.
totally on board from day one because they had already done some work with RNIB, the British.
Yes, the Royal National
Um,
Institute for the Blind. Yeah,
there you go.
in
So
England.
they had
Yeah.
already done some work to spec out what was their term for it? Modified stave notation,
Oh,
basically
okay.
large print music,
Okay.
and like ways of like how you want to do it, because it's not just making things larger. You want to change some of the
Mm-hmm.
ratios for how thick this line is compared to that line, and the
Mm-hmm.
spacing of this,
Yeah.
and so
Yeah. The
they
font of it
they
all
helped
is
us
kind of fun.
develop a whole set of custom profiles to and make sure that we supported all the necessary options to do all that stuff.
Yeah.
So the idea of accessibility, and there was grants that funded this, and
Mm-hmm.
so the idea of accessibility was already very strong on their
Okay.
minds when I approached them about, well, let's just do the screen reader thing, and they're like,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, that sounds great.
So this was
But
the original one of the original guys on of the development score was in touch with the RNIB. Is that?
yes,
Yeah.
yes.
Okay.
Mostly it was a guy named Nicolas Froment
Okay.
from France,
I see.
and he worked with them on developing this all the support
I see.
necessary for that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so then I interfaced with him as far as making sure that this other guy Andre's code would be
Mm-hmm.
acceptable, and so we both reviewed his code before getting it merged into the product. And also then when the second student I had came on board, I was still working very closely with the team at that point.
Yeah.
At some point, the team kind of shifted. There's a whole history of what happened, but the
Mm-hmm.
original founders of it basically sold their stake in the company,
Yeah.
and someone else kind of took over. And I was working with them as well at first, but maybe not as closely. And then enough other things came up in life where
Mm-hmm.
that I've worked with them less and less.
Yeah.
So some of the last bits of work that I did after the new people were in charge, I won't say that there was any difficulty getting it in there, but it it became increasingly
Yeah.
clear that it was like, well, this isn't something I can directly contribute to easily anymore for a number of reasons. And so
Right. Yeah.
I have basically not written any code for MuseScore in the last
Hmm.
year or two, probably.
Yeah. I mean, yes, naturally that happens when teams expand. You're going to get more bureaucracy. You're going to get more things to more layers, more
Yeah, and
yeah
just them
avenues to go through.
technology-wise, that the build processes have changed tremendously, and
Yeah.
I'd have to like learn all sorts of new tools and do a
Yes.
whole bunch and
Yeah.
set up a whole new build environment, and it's like, yeah,
You know,
I don't have room in my life for this.
yeah, I think there was a video about that about a lot of that overhaul made by a guy who on YouTube goes by Tentacroll. I think his name is
Right? Yeah,
Martin
Martin.
Curie. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, okay. I thought there was a connection there. I wasn't sure because he
Yeah.
has talked about MuseScore stuff and
Hmm.
his work with it. Although I guess no, the video I'm thinking of was about Audacity, but I think
Well, he
yeah
did one on
on MuseScore as
MuseScore
well. I think
also
yeah,
about
several. He's done
yeah,
a few on
yeah, he's done
yeah.
many, but the one he did one on the development of MuseScore 4 and all the changes that
Hmm.
went in, and
Yeah.
those changes were all the sorts of things where it became increasingly difficult for me to participate, both because they changed the technology, but also because while you're making those sorts of large scale changes, it's hard to accept code from
Hmm.
random other contributors because
Yeah.
you're like, no, we're actually changing that out from under you.
Hmm.
And so they basically just put a big do not disturb sign around the code for a year
Hmm.
saying,
Yeah.
yeah, you guys, we can't accept any third party contributions and until we're done with this. And by the time they reach that point, I'm like, I barely recognize the code anymore. It's changed so much and everything's changed. And so I would contribute a bug fix here or there, but I really couldn't see myself being
Right.
very heavily involved anymore.
Right. Yeah.
Well, there's two other
Do it.
things that I would be important to know
Hmm.
in that context. One is
Absolutely.
as part of that development of MuseScore 4, as part of these big foundational architectural changes they made, it meant it would suddenly automatically work with VoiceOver, which had never been the
Uh-huh.
case before. So that was great.
Ah, yes.
Like all the screen reader support
Right.
suddenly worked on all screen readers,
Right.
including narrator and voiceover, whereas before we had kind of like, we were lucky to get NVDA working. Eventually we got JAWS and Orca working,
Hmm.
but yeah, now it works across all screen readers. So that was a great thing, and I had nothing to do with that. But then this like complete out of the blue, that one student from Romania who had written the original screen reader support,
Hmm.
uh, basically during COVID lockdowns and so forth, decided he
Hmm.
would take it upon himself to implement Braille export.
Ah, yes.
So he just implemented it all by himself without even asking anyone, just wrote a bunch of code, dropped it on the doorstep one day and said, here's some code. And
Wow.
and
That's
we
awesome.
hadn't seen or heard from him in years, but so that's how the Braille export. It's a pretty minimal functionality, but it's great to have something built in.
Yeah.
And then we work with that Vietnamese organization, Sao Mai.
Hmm.
Am I saying, yeah, Sao
Saw
Mai?
my Braille. Yeah, I'm vaguely familiar. I
Um,
don't know much about him, but I've heard of him.
they have what is considered at this point the state of the art tool for converting music XML
Into Braille.
into
Yeah.
Braille,
Yeah.
and they
Okay.
worked with us then to make sure that our music XML would be palatable to their
Hmm.
converter, and they implemented a Braille panel directly within MuseScore so it can display the Braille and let you kind of navigate and to a limited extent edit in Braille directly. Very
Wow.
limited, but it's there. And so just
Yeah.
kind of like the Braille export, there's stuff built into MuseScore that no one else has anything remotely
Yeah.
like, other than other than the tools specifically
Well, and
developed for the blind community.
dancing. Yeah, I was gonna say
Yeah,
dancing
the
dots
dancing
and
dot
good Braille.
software,
Yeah.
obviously.
That.
But yeah, as far as the mainstream packages,
Yeah. Hmm.
the fact that there's a Braille panel and Braille export at all is huge.
Yeah.
But realistically, it's not as useful as the Music XML export into Salmai tools, which is really a solid path. And they've
Hmm.
worked with us and on making that path work well. And then I
Yeah.
continue to do kind of outreach within I'm on the Menv or however you
Yep.
pronounce that mailing list and things like that. So I'm trying to just
Yes.
generally keep my eye out for accessibility
Yeah.
issues and whatnot and be an
Yeah.
advocate.
Well, I can tell you have quite an interest in, or you certainly keep up with that. That also reminds me that something you mentioned a minute ago about cross-platform screen readers, and the most remarkable of that is Orca on Linux, which I mean
Yeah.
given that MuseScore is open source, that makes sense that there'd be an interest in having it work with Linux. But that is fairly unique, I can say, as
Oh yeah.
someone who's been blind my whole life. Most developers don't care at all about whether their product is accessible on Linux.
Right.
I mean,
Well, the
you're
fact that
lucky
it
if they care
runs
if it
on
works for
Linux
all
at
of them. Yeah,
all
exactly.
is already unique among notation
Yeah,
software,
yeah,
but that's because the original developer he's a
yeah,
Linux guy.
yeah. So I mean, did that come about from some of the Summer of Code students that you're talking about? Were they interested in the Linux side of that, or how did that?
No, that's actually work I did myself.
Oh, okay.
It came about more because we really wanted to get it working on JAWS, and so
Mm.
I started working. There's a guy, I don't know if you're familiar with Peter Torpy, I think is his name.
I've heard of him. Yeah,
So
because he
he,
has a podcast. I think I know him
yeah, he does
from
a
he and his
podcast,
wife
and
have a
he
podcast. Yeah.
exactly. And so I had been corresponding with him. He was interested in trying to get some JAWS scripts working so that because MuseScore, when we got NVDA working, it partially worked on JAWS, but not very well,
Mm-hmm.
very poorly. And so he was like, well, we could get to go on some scripts. And I was like, yeah, I can probably help write those scripts. We started corresponding, and then we realized we lived like 2 miles away from each other.
Oh, cool.
So we got together a couple times and kind of hashed out some stuff. And as we were hashing that out, then he brought in another guy whose name I don't remember, who solved some more technical issues for us.
Mm-hmm.
What's his name? Not Neil. I'm spacing on the other guy's name.
Yeah.
But also someone who kind of has like a little business of developing JAWS scripts and so
Mm-hmm.
forth.
Yeah.
As a result of doing that, I was like, oh, that we're doing these changes we're making, because we developed scripts, yes, but we also had to put some code in the MuseScore to make sure it
Mm-hmm.
would work. The code I was putting in, I was like, you know what, this is going to work with Orca too. And so
I see.
I then just went the extra mile of saying, well, as long as we're getting it to work with JAWS, I might as well see if I can get it working with Orca. And there's another guy, Peter Jonas. You're familiar with him?
A little bit, maybe. I
He's
forget.
on the MuseScore development team
Okay.
now.
Okay.
And he is he is the person officially charged with accessibility issues. I mean, it's
Mm-hmm.
one of his many
Mm-hmm.
responsibilities. And he and I did a presentation on MuseScore's accessibility at an open source conference a few years back.
Mm-hmm.
And it was in the run up to that it's because it was an open source conference. It was it was called FOSDEM, Free Open Source Developer European Meeting or something like
Okay.
that.
Okay.
But that is all Linux people, because it's
Yeah.
the whole open source world
Yep.
is
Yep.
Linux.
Yep.
And so we were going to give this presentation on MuseScore's accessibility for this basically Linux convention. I'm like, well, we should be accessible on Linux if we're going to be giving this
Mm-hmm.
presentation.
Sure.
So it was like that presentation was in February, and it was like the December before that we got JAWS working. I'm like, okay, I got 2 months to get Orca working. And so I think I got it working like
Wow.
the day before my flight.
Wow. Nice.
Yeah.
Wow. And so yeah. The process of getting that getting to work with JAWS script sort of opened your eyes to the possibility of Linux, because Orca also uses scripts and things.
Yes, and
That's
so
fair?
I
Yeah.
had to develop some script. I had to put some support into the program, but also do some Orca scripting. But now you don't need the scripts anymore. Now with the big changes they've made for MuseScore 4, those scripts are no longer needed, which is great. But
Well, yeah.
we're happy we were able to provide that while they were needed.
Yeah. Well, that's great. I mean, I think this whole thing speaks to the power of open source. Not that
Mm-hmm.
you need to. I'm preaching to the choir here, I realize, but
Yeah.
for those that
No, it totally does.
in the fact that you can pull from different backgrounds and so on. And at this point, it's integrated enough that you don't need like scripts and so on because of architecture changes, essentially, right?
Yes, although it is also the case that JAWS is right now the least well-supported
Mm-hmm.
screen reader. There's a number of things based on how things are implemented within MuseScore that JAWS doesn't like and
Mm-hmm.
would need scripting to improve
Right.
on.
Okay.
And one of the JAWS developers started to work because he was like, well, if MuseScore is open source, I know what JAWS needs. I could go into MuseScore and make the changes that would make JAWS work better, not writing scripts, but actually getting into MuseScore code.
Mm-hmm.
And he started working on that, but that never ended up going anywhere, to my knowledge. So it's still the case that JAWS is probably the weakest
Mm-hmm.
of the screen readers as far as the supported MuseScore, but it's nothing that some scripts probably wouldn't fix.
Yeah. Okay.
NVDA and Narrator are the ones all the developers can test without having
Mm-hmm.
to bought and installed JAWS.
Right. Right.
So, and Narrator is the easiest one to test because you don't have to install
Right.
anything.
Right.
And then NVDA, all the developers have NVDA
Mm-hmm.
installed, all the main developers, I should say.
Yeah. I suppose that's a fairly thorough picture of that whole development history. So,
Yeah, I think
thanks.
it's pretty good.
Yeah, thanks for your time.
All right, thanks. Okay.
All right, so that's my conversation with Mark. I know there's a lot of names being thrown around there, names of screen readers and operating systems and things. Don't worry trying to remember all of those. I just wanted to show you that because I think it gives you an idea of gives you a nice little behind the scenes look
343.
at what it's like to make all this happen. And also, yeah, like I said, it shows you the power of like open source and how he was able to and the MuseScore people in general were able to pull from a lot of wide range of backgrounds and an international group of people, across as he pointed out, across Europe and Asia, various countries across around the world. So yeah, the one thing he mentioned there that I meant to say before I played that was yeah, that he was talking about the Braille display function that you can. I don't have one here, but if I had a Braille display, I could plug it in, and though I've never tried this, apparently MuseScore MuseScore will display uh, the notes and stuff on the screen on the Braille display, and that again, I, I I was when I heard about that, I like really shocked in a good way because I was like, wow, that would never happen on any of the legacy programs. I mean, good luck getting that through all the layers of authorization and everything. So. Yeah, that was developed mostly, as he said, by the Saomai group, which is spelled Saomai. Um, and yeah, and as he said, NVDA is usually is in general the screen reader that works best, has the strongest functionality with MuseScore. So
Media player.
it's good to know in case you're interested. So yeah, now I'm just going to give a quick little demo of MuseScore, and then I can open it up for the interactive part.
Screen share untitled score column 3. Post untitled score untitled.
So yeah, what I have here in MuseScore is
volume 55.
oops.
Volume 70. Pitch 50. Volume pitch rate boost on. Rate boost rate 34. Rate 4 rate 9.
Okay, what I have here in MuseScore is
Untitled
a
score.
bit of a passage of
Untitled
music that
score.
I
Nope,
made here.
Speaker.
I'm afraid I didn't write it. It's based on Jerome Kern, but
Speakers. 100.
Standard.
Untitled.
All the things you are, and so I can use. So I'll again trying to keep it simple. There's a whole bunch of rabbit holes that you can get into with all the many features. But for now, I'm just going to show you how to navigate some notes. So I have two staffs here. Again, I'm speaking in print terms here because this is for producing sheet music. So
Nope.
right now I'm on the top staff, and I'm just going to right arrow.
Previous.
Okay, I did left arrow to make sure I'm at the beginning, and I'm going to right arrow through it. So
previous chord / shift text left.
okay.
Note C5 quarter. Measure 1 beat 3.
So I'm gonna go left so you can hear it announce the first note. It's gonna say the pitch and value and everything, and as you can hear it, it's gonna play the note. So
Note G4 half. Measure 1 beat 1.
So G4, that's the pitch. G in fourth octave. Half, that's half note, and it's at measure 1 beat 1. I'll press right arrow.
Note C5 quarter. Measure 1 beat 3.
Note C5 quarter. Measure 1 beat 3.
Note G4 quarter. Measure 1 beat 4. Note F sharp 4/8. Measure 2 beat 1 accidental sharp.
So it's an F sharp. It's an eighth. The way it pronounces the word eighth is a little hard to hear across the room. So it's It's an eighth note, and then yeah, it's a sharp, it's F sharp.
Note F sharp 4/8. Note F sharp 4/8. Note F sharp 4/8.
There are four of those in a row.
Note B 4 quarter. Measure 2 beat 3.
Okay, and again, with each of these, it'll tell you what beat it's on. So we're measure, aka bar 2, beat 3, and
Note F sharp 4 quarter.
I'm just right arrowing through
Note
this
E
whole
4/8.
thing.
Note E4. Note E 4/8. Note A sharp 4 quarter. Note E 4 quarter. Note D sharp 4 whole. Measure.
So I'm gonna go back. I'm gonna do Control left arrow a few times, which will move by measure back to the beginning.
Note pre.
Okay, so I'm at the beginning. Now I'm gonna do Alt down arrow, which will move to the bottom staff, which will play the bass notes.
Staff 2. Piano. Note E2 half. Measure 1 beat 1.
Note E2 half, measure 1 beat 1. So the note is E in the second octave. That's E2. The note length is it's a half note, and it's measure 1 beat 1.
Note A2 half. Measure 1 beat 3. Note D2 half. Measure 2 beat 1. Note G2 half. Measure 2 beat 3.
So these are all half notes. So they're going to start on beats 1 and 3 of each measure.
Note C2 half. Measure 3 beat 1. Note F sharp 2 half. Measure 3 beat 3 act. Note B1 half. Measure 4 beat 1.
And so on like that. So I'm just, again, right arrowing. I can go left arrow to move backwards.
Note previous.
Keeps repeating. That means I'm on at the beginning, far left. So, and then if you want to hear everything you've written, you can press space to play. So it'll play back this passage that is on the screen here.
Replay.
So those are the 8 bars that I wrote there for demonstration. Well, again, didn't that I borrowed from Kern and that I wrote on this program for demonstration here. So yeah, and that's also what's written on this piece of paper here. So you can check out the Braille music. So yeah, I guess that's kind of the Carissa, if you're still there, that's kind of the end of the recorded part. So we can stop the recording now because I'm just gonna open it up for well.
Post.
Let's,
Untyped.
I'm going to
Application. Score. Next. Previous.